you all for being here and taking your lunch hour to probe this vitally important topic. As many of you know, by reading the paper, listening to parents, and feeling the what's in the air, we are in the midst of a national crisis on reading achievement. Some of it due to the after effects of the pandemic and the ongoing effects of the pandemic, some of it due to the use of curricula that was not scientifically supported. So we have a lot of catch up to do. Fortunately, it's teaching reading. This is something we can really address. This is a challenge that we can truly meet. And in order to meet that, we need to come together both as a community and a school district, each doing the work to complement that of the other. As we begin today, we're going to start to look at the scope of the issue. And in the next events in our series, we will begin to narrow our focus specifically to Worcester and thinking about what we are doing here in the city already, where we stand related to our peer communities, meaning our geographic peers, and then thinking what are some of the best practices that we can use, some of the new thinking that we can use to address this issue. I'd like to thank our planning partners and who've been with us since the beginning on this. That is Education Reform Now, the Reading League of Massachusetts, Friendly House, Girl Scouts of Central Massachusetts, the Worcester Public Library, Worcester Family Partnership, Worcester Public Schools, United Way of Central Massachusetts, United Way, and the Division of Youth Opportunities. Let me now introduce the folks who'll be speaking today. Let me begin by introducing David Rodriguez, who will be serving as our interpreter for Spanish language today.
Hi, folks. My name is David, and I'll be providing interpreting services in Spanish from the language bank. So for those who choose to the Spanish channel, we're going to have a separate room where I can be doing the interpreting for you. And nice to meet you all.
Thank you, David. Okay, let me now introduce Ron Noble, who will be setting the table for us and giving us an overview of where we are. Ron is with the National Council for on Teacher Quality. He has almost 20 years of experience in public education, beginning as a middle school math teacher in New York and serving several roles at the district level in New York. He went on to join the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And from there, most recently, was an assistant superintendent for the Methuen Public Schools, a small urban district in our state that serves about 7,000 people. In that position, what he is most proud of was the work that he did to lead literacy outcomes for all learners. Ron holds a law degree from Rutgers School of Law, a master's in education from City College in New York, and an undergraduate degree from Boston College. And he is the parent of 2 sons in the Boston Public Schools. So I am handing the talking stick to you, Ron.
Thank you so much, Jen. If I can just get thumbs up from folks to tell me that they can see the slides. Thank you very much. Jen, thanks for that warm welcome. Like Jen said, I'm with the National Council on Teacher Quality. We're a Washington, D.C. based education advocacy organization focused on all issues related to teacher quality. And we've done 2 major reports in the last year related to early literacy. And so I'm delighted to be with you all today in my home state and be able to talk to you about some of the things that we found in our analysis and kind of set the stage for what sounds like a great series that WEC has set up for everybody. So I won't belabor my bio since Jen covered it for you, but just to say that again, it's great to be talking with folks in my home state about this issue, and just know that for me, it's both professional and quite personal. With my two young kids going through the Boston Public Schools right now. I have one in second grade and one in pre-K. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit with a little bit of data, and then I promise you this presentation will become more hopeful as we get going. But we can estimate there are about 230,000 students currently sitting in Massachusetts classrooms who are not meeting their grade level standards in English language arts, and not surprisingly, these students are disproportionately from historically marginalized groups. Including racial subgroups, as well as students with disabilities and students learning the English language. We can change these results. As Jen alluded to, there's a significant research base that tells us how to most successfully teach students how to read. And it's just about arming our teaching staff with the right skills and knowledge to be able to put that research into practice. Want to show you one slide from our state assessment results from 2023. Our state assessment, also known as MCAS. Students take an MCAS test in English language arts every grade from 3 through 8, and then again in grade 10. And you can see in the last administration, only 44% of our students are meeting or exceeding expectations on the 3rd grade MCAS, which means that there is work to be done in those earliest grades before the test starts to increase those percentages of students that are able to meet that grade level standard mark when they get to grade 3. And you can see again broken out here the breakdown of our subgroups and how those students are able to succeed on the MCAS, and you can see the disproportionality there that I mentioned. We also have another test that we look at regularly when we're trying to figure out where shortcomings might exist, and that's called the NAEP, N-A-E-P. This is also known as the Nations Report Card. So this is a national measure that allows for cross-state comparisons, because every state uses its own state test. It's hard sometimes to make comparisons, and that's the role NAEP can play for us, is to really give us a sense of where there might be bright spots and who's moving the needle in ELA and math and some other subjects that NAEP measures. But when we look at our Massachusetts data on the 4th grade reading test in NAEP, you can see a similar sort of situation that we see on MCAS, where since the pre-pandemic scores and post-pandemic scores, you see dips across all populations, and those dips are even larger for our historically marginalized students. In the most recent NAEP data, and this is a finding the Boston Globe included in some of their recent early literacy reporting that I just find quite stark. Children from low-income families in both Florida and Mississippi, states that have really embraced what's been called the science of reading, really embraced scientifically based reading instruction, and have put new structures and new policies in place. Children from low-income families in those 2 states have actually outperformed their Massachusetts peers since 2019. It's a pretty sobering thought when you consider that Massachusetts has long been regarded as having the highest quality public school system in the country. And what does this all translate to? When we think about the whole purpose of school, it's setting up our kids for a life of success. And research tells us that children who don't learn to read in elementary school are 4 times less likely to graduate from high school. And then the impact even carries into their post-school lives. They have lower lifetime earnings than children who are able to learn to read by grade 3. So there's a sense of urgency for every cohort of kids that are going to that pivotal 3rd grade mark to make sure that as many of them as possible have been able to be the beneficiaries of scientifically based reading instruction. I found these these data from the Boston Globe reporting really interesting. So we're going to talk about later on in this presentation the role that curriculum can play. And in Massachusetts, it's quite interesting to me that there's been a shift, and you're going to see that. So this is data from the 2022-2023 state collection on what curriculum folks are using in different districts across the state. And the state has a collection of options that they've deemed high quality and a collection of options that they've deemed lower quality. And you can see in 2022-23, 62% of our wealthiest districts were using low quality curriculum compared to 46% of all districts statewide. You can see good movement. Now, there's more movement to be made here, but just a year later, those percentages have dropped to 47% and 40% statewide. So there's still plenty of places in the state that need to move on to higher quality curricular options for their kids. And there is this disparity that we're seeing that's quite interesting between higher income districts and lower income districts, where the higher income districts seem, for whatever factors, more wedded to lower quality curricular resources. And it's easy to get lost in the data a little bit and say, well, those places are doing just fine. But when you dig into their data and you look at those subgroups, those racial and racial subgroups and subgroups related to students with disabilities and English learners, students in all those communities are struggling as well. So one of the first analysis that NCTQ, my organization, did within the last year looked at educator preparation. So this is the programs that aspiring teachers are completing before they're ever in front of kids in a classroom. And we wanted to ask the question, are those programs teaching teachers to teach reading following the science of reading, or following what we call scientifically based instruction principles? And so I'm going to share a little bit about what we looked at, how we got to the conclusions we made, and what we looked at. So you can find much more detailed information, and I'll make sure these slides are available to everybody. But if you zoom into that QR code, you'll get to our technical guide, where you can learn a lot more about what we put into the process of this analysis. But we convened an expert panel from across the country, practitioners, researchers, early literacy experts from higher ed. We also had a technical advisory group that was focused on the measurement aspect of what we were doing. And then we had a long comment period where stakeholders got to weigh in on the conclusions we were making about what to look for, these 5 core components, and how to look for it. So we looked at things like how many instructional hours do programs commit to each of these 5 core components. We looked at the types of assessments that were being used. We looked at lecture notes and background materials, and what textbooks these educator preparation programs were assigning teacher candidates to read, to draw some conclusions about the quality of their programs for early literacy. We also looked at how programs were preparing teachers to instruct students, including struggling readers, English language learners, and speakers of English language varieties, such as African American English. What we found here, our national finding is only 28% of the educator preparation programs that we looked at, which were over 700 total across the country, adequately address all 5 core components of reading instruction. And you can see in Massachusetts, that number is just over a quarter. So it's actually less than the national. And you can see in Massachusetts, the orange bars on this slide show that a greater percentage of our programs are teaching fewer of these core components in an adequate way than in programs across the country. We also looked at whether Massachusetts programs were teaching practices that are actually counter to the research, that are contrary to what research tells us we should be doing to teach kids to read. Things like 3Qing, embedded phonics, leveled text, and balanced literacy. And we found 68% of Massachusetts programs are still teaching multiple practices that run counter to the research. So imagine the mixed signals that new teachers have when they're being taught one way to teach reading in their educator preparation programs, and then they're getting to their districts and they're being taught hopefully that they should be using scientifically based reading instruction principles and curriculum aligned to scientifically based reading instruction. Imagine how confusing that must be for a brand new teacher who is already feeling overwhelmed by all of the other fun things that coincide with that first year of teaching. When we look at those specific 5 core components, it's fluency and phonemic awareness that generally receive the least attention across programs, and that's true in Massachusetts and nationally. So that was our sort of main takeaway from looking at educator preparation. I'm going to shift now and talk a little bit about state policy. So the next analysis we did was we looked at whether state policy, and this is true in Massachusetts and across the country, supports evidence-based reading instruction. And we looked specifically at 5 things. We looked at whether the state has detailed reading standards that they're holding prep accountable for. We looked at whether the state is reviewing those educator preparation programs to make sure that they're teaching the science of reading. We looked at whether the state uses a strong elementary reading licensure test. So after teacher candidates complete their preparation programs, are they then required to take a reading test that is that final check to make sure that they have the knowledge and skills they need to be able to be successful with students? Does the state require districts to use high quality reading curriculum? And does the state have systems in place to make sure teachers have access to strong professional development and ongoing supports to sustain implementation of the science of reading? So those were the 5 things we were looking for. So here you can see how Massachusetts stacks up. And again, the top QR code there is a Massachusetts specific profile that you can read for more information. And then the bottom QR code there is an action guide that we put out that has examples from many states across the country, including Massachusetts, for some of the strong practices they have in place. So we found a mix in Mass. We do have really strong reading standards for prep programs. They got a moderate on that key action because we don't actually have in Mass requiring experts on the panels of folks that do that review for DESE. And that's a missing piece we think could be easily rectified. We do use a strong reading test. In fact, the reading test that Massachusetts developed is actually in use by, I think, upwards of a dozen other states because of how strong it is. We don't require districts to select high quality reading curriculum. So we earned a moderate there. We have some guidance out there to help districts make good choices, but there isn't a requirement as there is in many other states now. Similarly, our presence in the professional development space earned us a moderate because we don't have a strong professional development infrastructure at the state level for this. Although the state has issued grants and other incentives to support local professional development. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about each of those. So we do have some reasons for optimism. You can see how we kind of stack up nationwide. We're in that moderate camp overall. And there are plenty of states that are in that weak or unacceptable camp, but also I think we need to look at some of those dark blue states and say, what are they doing in terms of policy that we can potentially adopt here? Another reason for optimism, we do have proposed legislation happening right now that would address both some of the issues we have in teacher prep and some of the issues we have in K-12 districts. So it would require DESE to review teacher prep programs specifically for whether or not they're aligned to scientifically based reading instruction, evidence-based literacy instruction, which would be a great addition to our policy landscape. We also, this bill would also establish professional development for teachers and administrators on the science of reading, and require curriculum aligned to evidence-based literacy instruction. Both of those things would move the needle on some of those moderate scores that I showed you on the previous slides. And then for students, the proposed legislation includes universal screening. And for students that whose screening results show that they might need some additional supports, would include a requirement that the students be that the families be engaged in a monitoring plan, so that there's some real structure to supporting those kiddos to get up to grade level, so that their next screening results are stronger. Another cause for optimism is the Secretary of Education and the governor have announced a new program that was included in the governor's budget. This doesn't become official until it passes through the final state budget for next year, but the governor and the secretary have been very vocal about their interest in establishing what they're calling Literacy Launch, which would be a 5-year initiative with an initial year of funding at $30 million. And if that $30 million number carried through for all 5 years, if it was $30 million a year for 5 years, it would put Massachusetts sort of up there with the major investment that many other states have made around early literacy. One of the things that we fought for when I was at DESE for years is it was unconscionable to me how little state money was invested in K-12 literacy. Forget just about the early space, but we're talking about years, decades of funding that line at about $5 million in a state our size, which is nowhere near the amount of money it takes. So a $30 million investment for Literacy Launch in year one, and if that were renewed over this 5-year plan, now we start to scrape the surface of what we could potentially do. And what we've heard, there's not a lot of detail right now out there about what Literacy Launch would include, but the things that we have heard are encouraging, and it would be focusing grants on curriculum adoption for districts, professional development for teachers, literacy coaching, all of these essential pieces that really can transform, how a district addresses reading instruction. So we're optimistic there. That's another place that groups like WEC and you all can help be voices with your local electeds to make sure that folks are paying attention to this, and make sure that both the bill and the governor's budget proposal come to fruition. So in terms of concrete recommendations, I just mentioned this, we encourage everybody to contact their state representatives to support the proposed bill and support the governor's budget proposal that would bring Literacy Launch to fruition. We also have some structures in our state around supporting districts to make good decisions regarding curriculum. Folks may be familiar with DESE's Curate project. Curate stands for Curriculum Ratings by Teachers. This is a project that's been going on 5 or 6 years now. I started it when I was at DESE, and it involves convening panels of educators from across the state and reviewing evidence of commercially available curricula, both open source and for cost comprehensive curricula. And those panels look at whether the curricula are aligned to our state standards, as well as how usable the curricula are for teachers. Because you can have a great curricula, but if it's the most complicated thing in the world to unpack and actually figure out how to lesson plan from it, it's useless. So you really need both of those pieces. You need it to be high quality on its face, but you also need it to be practical. And so those teacher panels really weigh on both of those dimensions. And then the state publishes reports on what the teachers have found. I think it's a great process. The teachers that have been involved in that have been, I think really happy to have been part of the Curate work, and it's opened their eyes to a lot of new options that are out there. One of the things that I've been observing is there's a lot of critique and worry from some folks about any motion by the state to narrow decision making around curriculum. And to those folks, I often say, I think it's probably been too long since you took a look at what's on the market now, because it looks really different from the curriculum that I know I was handed when I was teaching in New York City. Granted, that was math, but curriculum has changed a lot. You see a lot more emphasis and thought and deliberation around raising up historically marginalized voices in ELA curriculum offerings, and being really intentional about how the scope and sequence about foundational skills and the knowledge building aspects of curriculum. And so if it's been more than a handful of years since you've taken a look at what's out there, I think Curate's a good place to start, and I think most folks will be pretty impressed by what they find. As Jen mentioned, I was in Methuen for the last 3 years as the deputy superintendent there, and we did some curriculum adoption work, and my teachers were, I think, skeptical at first about any sort of comprehensive curriculum offering, because they were used to, in many grades, sort of cobbling together their own stuff from a variety of sources. But when they actually took a look at some of the options that were out there, they were persuaded, and we ended up making some choices in those directions. But I would make sure that to the extent that you can be voices around these projects that are out there, and the good quality options that I think raise the floor for instruction. Certainly, you need amazing teachers to take those materials and make them sing for kids, but I think they offer a good, solid foundation. And then urge the state to be more transparent about what curriculum are being used. It took the Globe reporting, which I find really interesting, to show the curriculum that every district is using in the early literacy space, and match it to the state's definition of quality. The Globe had to do that. And one question I have is, why isn't DESE out there doing that more? And then advocate for your school districts to adopt high quality curriculum, and ask those questions. You can see the QR code here. This is a resource that we put together specifically for families to help ask the very specific questions about their own child, and whether they're getting what they need in terms of evidence-based literacy instruction, but then to ask the more global questions to the district about how they make decisions around curriculum adoption, and what materials they considered and rejected, and why they made the decisions they made. I think those are really important questions for communities to be asking. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a moment and open it. I don't know if I'm opening directly for questions, Emily, so or Jen, I'll follow your lead, or if we're going to hear first from another speaker.
Ron, why don't you hold on questions for now, and we will do questions at the end. Alyssa is going to facilitate the question and answer. Okay. I'd now like to introduce Dignamar Figueroa, who is a parent here in Worcester, and she is going to talk about her experience with her family. Dignamar, and you're muted.
I'm good now. Can you guys hear me?
Good. Yes.
Okay. So I have noticed, especially with especially my youngest, she has an issue with her eye. So that already makes it harder for her to learn how to read and adjust to reading. And then she also is, in a sense, in the spectrum. So I have noticed that it's kind of something, and it's hard because you can't get everybody on the same page. But I feel like at home and at school, they need to have a consistency. If the kids have consistency, but it's hard because not every parent has the time to be constant and be on top of every little thing, because they also got to work or they're low income. And there's all these things. But in reality, I feel like, especially now with electronics is becoming a big thing. And so that is also taking time from like their reading time. And if they're not if like the parent is not having the time to be able to be like, okay, we need, you only have this amount of time for, tablet or whatever they have, and you have this amount of time for homework, and you have to do your homework first, and you got to do your readings. And like, I do like a chores and rewards chart with my kids, like, okay, you do your reading today, you do your homework today, you do this and that, you get your points, you get your stars, and you get a gift. And so that's been incenting them to like, okay, before I even grab my tablet, I'm gonna do my reading and I'm gonna do my homework. So then And also the program that they go to where Alyssa, she's the director, they're really good with making sure like they do their homework first. And so that has like really been helping them. So then when they come home, most of their homework is done. So it gives them more time to be able to, work on reading. And especially like mine's in kindergarten, depending on what age level they're at, they need help. They need help learning, and they need help at home as well. And not just, and so, some parents, they don't, they don't speak English, or they don't know the English language. And so that makes it harder for them too. And so, and I've noticed in low income families, it's not that some parents don't want to help their children, they don't know how. They don't know how to go about it. They don't know how to help their children because they were raised differently in another country. They got language barriers themselves, and they got their own reading and language barriers. And that's the reality, even as a parent, even though they're older and they're supposed to be that strong, backbone for the kids to be able to learn and what's it called, to get that help at home. Some of them are not getting it, and not because the parents don't want to, it's just they really don't know how, or the language barrier is a barrier for them, or they work a lot and they just don't have the time to sit there with their kids constantly and make sure, they're constantly, because I feel like a child, me personally, I have my kids reading every day, at least take 20 minutes every day and read, and let's work. And I try to give them, okay, if you're going to use a tablet, we'll start doing learning stuff, productive stuff, things that is going to help them also at school, and not just, okay, they're doing this at school, they're working on this program at school, but then at home they're not getting that, and so it's not consistent for them. And I feel like consistency for them is really a big thing, especially for small children. But I know that not everybody has the capacity. Everybody's at a different level. So I know that it's not easy for everyone to do the same thing. But those are some challenges I've learned, and I have worked because I've been working on it. How I am now with my kids and how active I am in my kids' life. And when it comes to their academics and learning and reading and all that, I am now like, okay, if I don't know, I'm going to figure it out so I can help them. And because I also go to college myself, and going to college has really like helped me learn like, okay, there's these things we got to work on, and these barriers we got to break down through. But not every parent has that chance, opportunity, or time. So I think that's really a challenge, is that at home, if they're not getting as much consistency and challenge and opportunity like they do at school and at the programs, because you got to think like, if at the programs and at school, they're getting these helps and all these things, but then it's not continued at home, then they break out of it and go back in, and break out and go back in. And so that also gives them a barrier, if that, makes sense. I hope I said that right. I'm not sure. And I hope that
Excellent.
helps too. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys. I
Dignamar.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you for sharing your experience and broadening it to help us understand different groups of parents and what their experiences may be.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I am going to lob it over to Alyssa Corazzini. Alyssa is with Friendly House and is doing good work with parents and families over there. Alyssa.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Ron, and thank you, Dignamar, for joining us today and just sharing both of those experiences. I've also worked in the District of Framingham and now working at an after-school program for a nonprofit like Friendly House. So I really understand both sides and really appreciated you touching also on like the part of talking about curriculum and how teachers have to also learn how to apply that and make lessons plans, because that's like a very big part of it as well. We do have questions prepared for both of you. And so this first question goes to Ron. And the question is, how does the decline in test scores related to the increase in the number of students who are chronically absent?
I think that's a critical issue. You saw Commissioner Riley, in the fall come out pretty strong from DESE about chronic absenteeism and the impact it's having on all aspects of learning. I mean, we can't attend to students' social and emotional needs. We can't attend to students' needs following trauma, and we can't attend to students' needs academically if they're not with us in schools. So I think there's definitely a relationship between chronic absenteeism and what we're seeing in reading test scores and the daily feedback that teachers are seeing in their classrooms every day in terms of the quality of student work. I think the pandemic definitely had a major impact on how many students view school, and we need to get back to creating desire in students to want to be in school. And I think that starts with, like in Methuen, I can tell you we had a two-pronged approach. We were laser focused on literacy, but we were also laser focused on students' mental health supports. And those were sort of the two pillars that we were pushing on at the district level, hand in hand. You need both of them.
And that, I think this also connects to like our next question, which is for both of you. How do the factors out of school, after school programming, reading to your child contribute to literacy achievement? Yeah.
Sorry. So I feel like this is me personally. When I started realizing that Gabby was having, she just went into kindergarten this year, and I started I work really, closely with the teachers, also like I do with you, and I try to be very active in finding ways to help them. And when I started like really communicating with the teacher, she started explaining and showing to me like, hey, this is where she's strong at, and she's having issues with reading. And I started realizing that it was because she had books that were sent home and we were supposed to read together and work on it together. And I wasn't realizing that at first. I thought it was like, okay, we read it today and then that was it. No, she had to come home and read it every day. So then she can present it that day a week, which was either Thursday or Friday. And so I realized that if I take even just 15, 20 minutes every day and sit down with her and be like, okay, let's read this book. And then I will let her do the words that she knows. And then the ones that she doesn't, all right, let's work on these words and really get into it and learn and put the tablet down and really get into it. And I realized that the more support I give her, the better she gets. And in reality, like, they're children, they're still learning. And I know that it's hard for parents. They're doing a lot as well. And it's not easy, but giving them that support and that constant support and routine and getting them used to that and used to like, this is important as well as other things too, is very important, being on top of them and consistent with them and letting them know that it's a good thing that they're doing that and that they're learning, and give them positive feedback like, oh, you're doing a great job, like this is good, because then it makes them more excited to do it because they're like, okay, I'm doing something good, and mom's excited and we're excited. And that really, at least for my children, it's really has helped them grow. Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. I also want to give you the opportunity as well if you wanted to answer that question.
I'll just build on what Dignamar shared, that I think using an explicit curriculum for foundational skills gives kiddos that routine and scope and sequence that lets them latch onto it in the classroom. But it also, I think, helps me as a parent. My children, my oldest is just kind of through this. He's in second grade, so he's just getting through the foundational skills, while my youngest is in the thick of it in pre-K. And knowing what the school is using and how they're using foundations, helps me as a parent know how to help them at home with those same skills. And we can see the work coming home, with my children and know how to reinforce it. I think absent that sort of organization from a curriculum standpoint, it makes it harder for parents to know sort of what their kids are doing during the day and how they can reinforce those things at home.
Thank you. I also want to highlight one of the comments in the chat that says 20 minutes a day adds to a tremendous growth. It does. We do see that in after school, that 20 minutes consistent reading allows the kids to be able to ask questions and really build on that. And so we do have a lot of kindergartners in our program who we do 20 minutes of reading with. So I also just wanted to ask a question to you, Ron. How can we support parents like Dignamar?
I think one of the most important things for parents is to feel like they have some agency in in the supports and services that their children are receiving. I'm really happy that Massachusetts is one of the states that kind of got out in front on literacy screening. So now we have a law, and we're kind of through that like hazy beginning period, and now it's required that every district is screening all students in literacy at least twice a year in grades K through 3. I think it should be 3 times a year. It should be fall, winter, spring. But I at least we've got the law requiring 2 times a year. But those data should be shared with families, and families should have an exact understanding of where their kid is at each of those checkpoints in terms of their reading progression. I think that is like having that data and knowledge is absolutely essential for families to know what questions they should be asking of their child's teacher, and then as needed, escalating it up to the building and district leadership, and what supports that they can be providing at home. So I think being armed with data is a parent's best best asset, best tool in supporting their kids, and I'm pleased that we have that piece of this puzzle kind of in place at this point. That was thanks to dyslexia advocates in the state of Massachusetts. I mean, they're the ones that really hammered that through the legislature and got folks paying attention. But it helps all kids, whether your child's a brilliant reader or struggling for any number of reasons. Having that consistent data point back from schools is going to really help parents in that conversation.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from Karen. So she asked, what should a parent do if the school system isn't using an evidence-based curriculum? Use a different approach at home, possibly?
I mean, for me, I would be banging down the door of the school asking why. I mean, there's no excuse. There really is no excuse. At this point in time, with millions of dollars flowing into every school district from COVID relief funds, a district telling me that they couldn't afford to make a different choice, or that they're going to disregard the science and pursue a different curriculum out of just a preference or some other flimsy rationale, I just don't get it. There is no excuse that I would buy as a parent, and I haven't. I've had those conversations in my children's school, and pushed that issue along. And I'm not the only one. I think there are many parents in every community, and we saw this in the Globe in some of the wealthier communities. I showed those figures where some of the wealthier communities are wedded to debunked curricular approaches. And you see parents starting to stand up and get together and say that's not acceptable. I think it's tragic that a parent would have to think that they would have to teach their child how to read using a different methodology at home because the school is failing them in that way. That's a tragedy.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, so we have someone in the chat who also asked another question. Kim, she said, do you think that Literacy Launch will also identify best screening tools and provide resources for implementing them, screeners or iReady, et cetera? Sorry,
can you repeat that one?
Sorry, I might have spoken too fast. So she asked, do you think that Literacy Launch will also identify best screening tools and provide resources for implementing them, screeners or iReady? So for people who aren't familiar with iReady, it's like a platform that's used inside of classrooms that basically will prompt children at their own pace, different levels of reading. So
I do. Desi has already done some good work. I'll find the link while we're talking and drop it in the chat, but they've already vetted a bunch of high quality literacy screening options for districts, and then incentivize their use through grant funds, which I think is a solid approach. I think Literacy Launch will probably continue that investment to make sure that Desi has the resources it needs to continue that work as new screeners come on the market. So I do think that, I think another piece of it, and it was alluded to in the way the question was asked, is our teachers being provided the professional development they need to use the screening data and allow it to inform instruction in a meaningful way. And do they have time in their daily schedules to do that? I mean, all of this is complicated work. And when we took it on in Methuen, we thought really carefully about making sure that we had carved out enough time in the daily elementary school schedule for teachers to use those screening data to provide targeted supports to students to meet their specific needs. Because we know there's this balance of wanting to provide every student with grade level reading material, which is really important to build their background knowledge, but also time in the day to provide them the more targeted supports to meet their individual literacy needs. So it's that two-pronged approach. You need a high quality tool, and you also need to make sure you're investing the time in the teacher's day, both to provide them the professional development they need and to provide them the time to work with their kids using the data, every day.
Thank you for sharing. Dignamar, we do have a question for you as well. What do you wish your school would do to help you? What supports do you think are missing?
So I feel like, and it's tough because, the school that my kids are at, compared to a lot of other schools, is a decent school. But they also I feel like they need to have more individual groups because there's kids with different learning levels. Not all kids, like kids with disabilities, are not going to learn at the same pace with a child that doesn't have it. The reality of the truth, that child needs more help, more understanding, more, how do I explain it? Not just, and I don't feel like it's the school's fault when it comes to emotional intelligence. I feel like that's also the parent. But I feel like in the sense of, if the kid is different and is at a different learning level and it doesn't have, and that child, it needs more resources, is the best way I can say, like more resources and more help, then there should be a type of like club, not a club because I do that here, but some type of program that can also help the parents learn with the school and work together to give that child the help that they need. Because sometimes it's like, okay, the school will learn or know certain things, but not let the parent know. Or by the time they let the parent know, it's already been a good year or two, and it's like, we should be doing this from the beginning. And it's like, if the child has these learning, disabilities, or if they need extra help when it comes to reading and they're still really good and smart in math and other areas, then let's give them that resource, and the parent also that resource to be able to get the children's where they need to go, but the parent as well. Because if the parent isn't aware of what their child needs, how are they going to do it? Because I've noticed that too, that some parents, it's just they don't know, they're not aware. And if they just become aware of those things, there are, at least me, I'm willing, and I know there's a few parents, they are parents like me that are willing to get the, give our child whatever resource and help that they need. But if we don't know, and if we don't work together, how are we gonna? Because I feel like that's another thing. Like, yes, parents and children's and at home, that's its own sector. And I know that school system is its own sector. But at the same time, in some way, shape, or form, we should be working together for the children. And at the end, it will make it easier for the teacher, because then that student will be getting, like I do that with my older one. She's very excellent, very intelligent, but she has behavioral issues. So I've been working with her teacher and building our own little, kind of not like curriculum, but like our own little way of when she's going through this and this and this. Okay, it might not be how other students might not be going through that, but she is going through that. So like we work, me and her, to be able to like, okay, have the same consistency at home and at school, and we can communicate like all the time. Like the last week, my daughter had a rough week, and like every day she was like, okay, this, and okay, that, and okay, this. And it was getting a little better in certain areas and not in others. So what we did was, this past week, we sat on Monday, we sat together, we talked, and we talked with her. And we're like, okay, this is what we got to do, and this is what we got to work on, and what's going on, and what is, like, I asked my daughter in front of the teacher, what is stopping you from this, this, and this? And then she was finally able, in front of both of us, okay, this is what I'm going through. So then it gave the teacher more insight on how to help her and how to work through that. And it gave me more insight on how to work on it and work through that. And so I feel like sometimes we just got to work together. We got to, work together. And I know not all schools are like that. And I know that some schools are easier than others and some are more willing than others. But in reality, if we want the kids to learn strict, like through the statewide a certain way, we have to kind of stabilize it a certain way too in all school systems. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. I hope I'm saying it right. I feel like I'm not.
Mhm.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, that's great, Dignamar.
Thank you.
Alyssa, there's a couple of other questions in the chat.
Yeah, so we have someone who asked, like, we're joined today by many wonderful community-based organizations that provide care and enrichment for many of our kids after school and during the summer. What roles can these organizations play to support literacy achievement?
I love that question. My 2 cents are, we spend a lot of time in the early literacy conversation talking about foundational skills, talking about how to give kids the building blocks they need to be able to learn how to read. The other side of that conversation is how we're using reading to build their knowledge, their background knowledge. Because as they get older, as they go up in the elementary grades, that background knowledge becomes more and more important. And a lot of newer curricula are organized around thematic units so that they can really focus on giving kids a heavy dose of one type of content, one piece of content as they're building the ELA skills at the same time. And I would say those community partners would be really well serving the kids they work with if they were to figure out what curriculum the district is using and how those thematic units are organized. And organizations like maybe the Worcester Public Library already does this, but put together text set collections that are grade level texts around topics that are match up with the units that the kids in Worcester are studying, and make those available to families so that when they're doing that 20 minutes of reading at night, they can complement what's happening in the classroom by continuing to build on that same domain of background knowledge. Childcare providers could do the same thing. After school providers could do similar things where they're just adding to that collection of information. We know kids are like sponges when it comes to building background knowledge. They just have to be confronted with the info and they suck it right up. I mean, I bet all of us have experiences talking to 4 and 5-year-olds who know more about dinosaurs than we would ever care to remember. And that's just an example, right? So if they're doing a unit in grade 2 about immigration at the turn of the century in America, then it'd be amazing if wherever those second graders are going after school, they have access to texts that continue to build up that background knowledge. I think those are small things that could go a long way.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely do agree with that as well, because one of the things that we see is that when we are practicing the same things, the routines, the schedules, using the same tools, like the students become more familiar and are better at navigating that. And I think that part of it is when we talk about parents' involvement, some of it is also working with the parents. And so, what we've seen in our after school program is that if we are able to like figure out what's going on at school, what homework they're sending home, like for example, the book bags and those type of things, we can also work with the parents and helping them and talking about what, like the plan, like, we're going to work on this in after school and then at home we'll send this over. And we've seen like significant progress with a lot of our students. So there is a question also someone had mentioned about working with she said, hi, I work with a mentoring program and we're interested in working to bridge this gap by collaborating with stakeholders in the Worcester Public Library. Is there a possibility we can explore? I think this might be a question for Jen or someone.
Sure, that is one of the things that as we continue on with this series, we contracted with a group called Hanover Research, which is doing a report for us, looking at where we are compared to other districts, a survey of our resources in the community now and best practices. So I'm hoping that that is where those kinds of conversations about new links and work that can synergize each other will come up. So if you can be sure to be at some of our subsequent meetings, we will be talking about that.
Thank you. And we do have one more question that either can answer. what can schools and parents reasonably expect from each other in terms of communicating and literacy support?
Dignamar, do you want to take that one first?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
No.
wasn't, okay, I'm gonna read it again.
Sorry. So the question was, what can schools and parents reasonably expect from each other in terms of communication and literacy support?
So, for, I feel like in reality, both have to be open to it. Parents have to be open to it. Teachers have to be open to it, and be understanding that it will be a process, and there will be ups and downs. But eventually, it can get to where it needs to get to if we all work together. It's just being open. Honestly, for me, I feel like being open to it, because when I started being open to, like, okay, I do got to work on myself, and I do got to work better for my children, and I do got to learn academically, all areas, to be able to, and in different areas, because of both my children are different, in a sense of to be able to help both of them, and not just check box it to just one box, like, oh, they're just one way. No, they're both different ways, and I'm going to have to learn for both of them, and and understand the teacher as well, and work together. That's how, for me, at least as a parent.
I agree. I think, the key is to from the school district perspective is to not be so defensive. I mean, I just see that time and time again where there's this just default that we all kind of fall into as educators, where we're defensive when a parent asks a pointed question about something that's happening in our schools. And now seeing the issue from both sides, being a parent and a former school leader, district leader, it's so apparent to me that parents are always just asking questions out of the interest of what's best for their kids. I mean, it's almost never that you encounter a parent that has some ulterior motive that is disconnected from wanting to make sure that their kids are happy, healthy, and successful. And I think the more we can just keep that frame in mind and see parents as the assets they are, from the school perspective, and it goes both ways. I mean, parents have to also recognize often that teachers have dedicated their lives to supporting kids, and so clearly in some way, and maybe it's not as apparent as it could be, but there's care there, there's love there, and I think it's a relationship that just has to be built over time, and it starts with the school. I think it's the school's responsibility to extend the branch first, always.
Thank you. We are at 1:00 at time now. So any final questions or comments before we adjourn? No. All right. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first in a series of lunch and learns that we'll be having. So each one builds on the information from the previous one to give us a comprehensive look when we finish the series, and will allow us to develop a plan of action for outside of school and support the kids while they are in school. And support all of us in the work that we need to be able to do, and the information that we need to have, and the skills that we need to have to be able to complement the work that's going on in the schools. So thank you all. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Dignamar. Thank you, everyone, for giving up their lunchtime to join us today. We will see you, Emily, April 3rd. At noon, same, as I used to say in my day, same bat time, same bat channel. Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.